April 16, 1945, 12 miles west of Okinawa. Fire Controlman First Class Robert Hagan watches his radar scope aboard the destroyer USS Laffey, tracking a single contact accelerating toward his ship from 23,000 yards out. The green phosphorescent blip moves with unnatural purpose, no evasive maneuvers, no altitude changes, just a straight line pointing at Laffey's position like an arrow seeking a target. Hagan's hands move across his Mark 37 director controls, feeding bearing and range data into the ship's main battery fire control system. The mathematics happen automatically now, computed by analog circuits that solve differential equations faster than any human could. At 17,000 yards, Hagan locks his tracking solution. At 14,000 yards, his director officer gives the command. At 12,300 yards, exactly 2.33 miles from impact, Laffey's forward 5-inch gun mount erupts. The shell takes 6.2 seconds to reach the target's predicted position. During those seconds, the Japanese Zero fighter, traveling at 350 miles per hour, covers 634 feet. The shell doesn't aim at where the aircraft is. It aims at where physics says the aircraft must be when explosive and target occupy the same point in space. The projectile and the Kamikaze meet at 8,000 feet altitude. The Zero disintegrates into a fireball of aviation fuel and torn metal that tumbles into the East China Sea, still 4,000 yards from Laffey's hull. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Fire Controlman Hagan has just accomplished something Japanese naval planners insisted was impossible. He shot down a kamikaze at a range exceeding 2 miles using radar fire control on a surface-to-air engagement. According to Japanese doctrine developed throughout 1944, American ships couldn't reliably hit aircraft beyond 5,000 yards. Japanese suicide doctrine was built entirely on this assumption. The kamikazes would absorb defensive fire during their approach, but enough would penetrate to destroy the target. Mathematical certainty backed by statistical analysis of American gunnery performance from 1942 through mid-1944. The statistics supported Japanese confidence completely. Throughout 1943, American destroyer gunners firing at aircraft achieved hit rates of approximately 4% at ranges beyond 8,000 yards. 4% meant that for every 100 5-inch shells fired at distant aircraft, 96 missed. A single destroyer carried roughly 300 rounds of 5-inch ammunition for its main battery. At a 4% hit rate, that translated to 12 theoretical hits per ship, assuming perfect conditions and unlimited time. But kamikaze attacks didn't happen in perfect conditions. They came in waves, multiple aircraft from multiple angles, overwhelming defensive fire through sheer numbers. Japanese planners calculated that if they launched 10 kamikazes at a single destroyer, forcing the ship to divide its fire among multiple targets, American gunnery effectiveness would drop below 2%. The mathematics were brutal and clear. 10 kamikazes, 300 defensive rounds, 2% hit rate, equals 6 hits total. Maybe 3 aircraft destroyed if multiple shells struck the same target. 7 kamikazes would get through. Only 1 needed to hit to sink or cripple the destroyer. The kamikaze strategy wasn't desperate fanaticism, though it involved suicide. It was cold mathematics built on accurate assessments of American defensive capabilities as they existed in 1944. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, who commanded kamikaze operations from the Philippines through Okinawa, kept meticulous statistical records. His analysis of conventional bombing raids versus kamikaze attacks showed that suicide tactics achieved hit rates 6 times higher than traditional dive bombing, while requiring half the number of aircraft. From a purely military perspective, trading 10 aircraft and 10 pilots to sink an American destroyer was mathematically efficient. Japan was losing the war through attrition. Conventional tactics couldn't match American industrial production or pilot training pipelines. Kamikazes represented an asymmetric solution. American ships cost millions of dollars and required thousands of man-hours to build. Japanese pilots could be trained in basic flight skills in 6 months. Obsolete aircraft, unsuitable for conventional combat, became lethal when flown directly into targets. The first organized kamikaze attacks commenced on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. 50 fighters from the Yamato Special Attack Unit dove into the escort carrier USS Street Low. 4 were shot down by defensive fire. The 5th struck Street Low's flight deck at 300 miles per hour, carrying a 500-pound bomb. The carrier exploded and sank within 30 minutes. 113 American sailors died. The exchange ratio was exactly what Ugaki's mathematics predicted. 5 aircraft, 5 pilots lost, 1 carrier, 113 men, $20 million in warship production destroyed. From Japan's perspective, facing inevitable defeat through conventional warfare, these numbers represented the only path to inflicting sufficient casualties that America might negotiate terms rather than demanding unconditional surrender. Throughout November and December of 1944, kamikaze attacks intensified. American ships operating off the Philippines faced waves of suicide aircraft that conventional gunnery struggled to stop. The statistics mounted with terrible consistency. The destroyer USS Abner Reed took a kamikaze on November 1, 22 dead. The cruiser USS Reno survived a hit on November 3, but required 6 months of repairs. The destroyer USS Cooper was sunk on December 3, 191 men lost. The pattern was undeniable. American ships were shooting down some kamikazes, but enough penetrated defensive fire to make the attacks tactically effective. Japanese planners, analyzing reconnaissance reports and intercepted American communications, concluded their strategy was working. American defensive gunnery remained inadequate at ranges beyond 6,000 yards. If kamikazes approached from multiple directions simultaneously, they could overwhelm point defenses and ensure hits. This assessment was accurate based on data from 1944. What Japanese intelligence failed to detect was that American gunnery technology had undergone a revolution that wouldn't become apparent until the spring of 1945. The transformation centered on a single technological system that American destroyers began receiving in late 1944, the Mark 37 Director, paired with Mark 1A fire control computers. The Mark 37 Director looked like a massive cylindrical housing mounted high on a destroyer's superstructure, weighing 11,000 pounds, and containing a radar system, optical rangefinders, and stabilization gyroscopes that compensated for the ship's motion in heavy seas. Inside that housing, fire control radar transmitted pulses at 3,000 MHz, receiving echoes from targets up to 40,000 yards distant with bearing accuracy of half a degree. But the Director was only half the system. Below decks, the Mark 1A computer occupied a climate-controlled space the size of a small room, filled with gears, cams, and differential analyzers that performed continuous calculations. Target bearing, target range, target altitude, target velocity, wind speed, air temperature, projectile ballistics, Earth's rotation. The computer integrated 23 separate variables and output a firing solution updated every half-second. Previous American fire control systems required manual calculations and human operators estimating target courses. The Mark 37 system eliminated human estimation error. Radar provided an objective target position. Computers calculated trajectories accounting for every variable affecting shell flight. Gun mounts received electrical firing data and automatically adjusted elevation and train. The entire process, from radar detection to gun firing, could execute in under 8 seconds. More critically, the system could track and engage multiple targets simultaneously. Previous fire control directors could only guide guns against one target at a time, forcing ships to choose which threatening aircraft to engage. The Mark 37's radar could track 6 separate contacts and prioritize them based on range and bearing rate. A destroyer equipped with this system could coordinate fire from multiple gun mounts, engaging 3 different aircraft at different ranges, while the fire control system automatically calculated separate solutions for each target. The first destroyers, equipped with Mark 37 systems, deployed to the Philippines in December 1944, but they arrived too late in the campaign to demonstrate the system's full capabilities. Japanese kamikaze attacks in that theater were already winding down as American forces secured the islands. The true test would come at Okinawa, where Japanese planners were organizing the largest kamikaze offensive of the entire war. Operation Ten-Go, the defense of Okinawa, allocated 1,500 aircraft to kamikaze missions. These weren't all frontline fighters. Japanese commanders scraped together every flyable aircraft, obsolete trainers, reconnaissance planes, even float planes. Anything that could carry explosives and reach Okinawa became a potential kamikaze. Pilots received minimal training, sometimes only 40 hours of flight time. They didn't need advanced skills. They just needed to find American ships and point their aircraft at targets. Vice Admiral Ugaki's operational plan called for massed attacks, kikusui or floating chrysanthemum operations, where hundreds of kamikazes would saturate American defenses simultaneously. Intelligence estimates suggested American ships could defend effectively against perhaps 30 aircraft at once using conventional gunnery. Ugaki planned to send 350 aircraft in single waves. The mathematics appeared overwhelming. Even if Americans shot down 90% of attackers, 35 kamikazes would penetrate to target range. The invasion fleet included hundreds of ships. Every kamikaze that got through would hit something. Japanese planning documents captured after the war revealed the specific assumptions underlying these calculations. American destroyers, the primary radar picket ships screening the invasion fleet, could engage effectively only at ranges below 7,000 yards. At that range, a kamikaze traveling at 300 miles per hour needed approximately 16 seconds to reach impact. During those 16 seconds, a destroyer might fire 8 to 12 shells. At historical hit rates of 10% for close-range engagements, that meant one hit per aircraft, possibly enough to destroy or deflect the kamikaze. But if the kamikaze approached from beyond 10,000 yards and didn't enter the effective engagement envelope until the final dive, American gunners would have perhaps 6 seconds of firing time. Maybe 4 shells per mount, 2 gun mounts typically bearing on any single target. 8 shells total at 10% hit rate meant 0.8 hits, not enough to stop the aircraft. The kamikaze would get through. These calculations were mathematically sound based on American gunnery performance through 1944. They failed to account for the Mark 37 system's capabilities, which Japanese intelligence had observed but not understood. Reconnaissance photographs showed the distinctive director housings on American destroyers. Japanese analysts noted them in reports but classified them as improved optical rangefinders, not revolutionary radar fire control systems. The misunderstanding was understandable. Radar technology in 1945 was still relatively new. Japanese ships carried radar for detection, but using radar to actively guide gunfire against aircraft required computational capabilities that Japanese fire control systems lacked. Japanese designers couldn't imagine American systems had already solved problems their own engineers considered theoretically impossible. The specific problem was prediction. To hit a maneuvering aircraft at 12,000 yards required predicting where that aircraft would be 6 to 8 seconds in the future. Human operators couldn't make those predictions reliably. The aircraft could turn, climb, dive, or change speed during shell flight time. By the time the projectile arrived, the target had moved. Japanese fire control doctrine emphasized close-range engagements specifically because prediction became impossible at extended distances. American engineers had solved the prediction problem through continuous tracking and differential calculus. The Mark 37's radar updated target position every half-second. The Mark 1A computer analyzed position changes over time, calculating velocity and acceleration in 3 dimensions. From velocity and acceleration, the computer projected future position, continuously updating the projection as new radar data arrived. This wasn't guessing. This was mathematics solving prediction through calculus. The result was a fire control system that could engage aircraft at ranges Japanese planners considered safe. A kamikaze at 12,000 yards was no longer outside the effective engagement envelope. It was simply a target requiring a 6-second firing solution. The Mark 37 could generate that solution, update it continuously as the aircraft maneuvered, and guide guns to hit a target the human eye couldn't even see clearly. Lieutenant Commander Julian Beckton, commanding officer of the destroyer USS Laffey, understood his ship's capabilities better than most. Laffey had received her Mark 37 installation during a refit at Seattle in January 1945. Beckton spent 6 weeks drilling his crew on the system, running practice engagements against towed targets, friendly aircraft, even balloons launched from cruisers, to simulate slow-moving contacts. By the time Laffey deployed to Okinawa in March, her fire control crew could track and engage targets at ranges exceeding 15,000 yards. Beckton had verified this personally, observing his gunners hitting towed targets at 13,200 yards during exercises off Pearl Harbor. Hit rates at extended range averaged 18%, nearly 5 times the historical performance of optical fire control systems. Beckton wrote in his personal log on March 28, "The new director changes everything. We can see targets before they see us, and engage before they enter what they think is attack range. If Japanese pilots are briefed that our effective range is 6,000 yards, they're going to have a very bad surprise when we start hitting at 12. The bad surprise arrived on April 16, 1945, when Laffey took her assigned position on Radar Picket Station No. 1, 14 miles north of Okinawa. Radar picket duty was the most dangerous assignment in the Pacific Fleet. These destroyers stationed themselves between the invasion beaches and likely Japanese approach routes, serving as early warning sentries and first-line defense against kamikaze attacks. They were deliberately positioned to draw attacks away from the main fleet. The mathematics of radar picket duty were grim. Between April 1 and June 22, 1945, 15 radar picket destroyers were sunk and 60 more damaged. The survival rate for ships on picket duty was approximately 38% over the 3-month campaign. Sailors called it coffin corner duty. Destroyer captains requested transfers to any other assignment. Nobody volunteered for radar picket stations. Laffey's crew understood exactly what their assignment meant. Fire Controlman Hagen, manning his Mark 37 director, had watched from 10 miles away 2 days earlier when USS Manat El Abele took 5 kamikaze hits and sank in 4 minutes. 79 men died. Abele had been equipped with the same fire control system Laffey carried. The technology wasn't invincibility, it was just better odds. At 07:28 hours on April 16th, Laffey's air search radar detected multiple contacts at 40 miles, bearing 010 degrees, approaching at low altitude. The raid count climbed as more aircraft appeared, 15 contacts, then 22, then 36. This wasn't a small attack. This was a Kikusui wave, a massed kamikaze assault designed to overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers. Beckton ordered general quarters. Laffey's crew reached battle stations in 93 seconds, faster than their previous record. Every man knew what was coming. The air search radar tracked the Japanese formation as it closed. 35 miles, 30 miles, 25. At 22 miles, the raid began splitting up. Individual aircraft broke formation, spreading across a 60-degree arc. They were positioning for coordinated attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Standard kamikaze doctrine called for approaching targets from several compass points at once, forcing American gunners to divide their fire and creating gaps in defensive coverage. A destroyer might have 6 gun mounts, but if 8 aircraft attacked simultaneously from different bearings, some kamikazes would face reduced or no defensive fire during critical approach seconds. At 18 miles, Hagen identified the lead aircraft on his fire control radar. The contact was accelerating. now showing a closure speed of 420 miles per hour. This was a diving attack profile, the Kamikaze building speed for the final run. Hagen's director locked the tracking solution at 16 miles. His training was automatic now. Confirm radar lock, verify target bearing and range rate, designate target to gun mount 5, forward 5-inch gun. The Mark 1A computer began its calculations. Target bearing 015 relative, range 28,800 yards, altitude 7,000 feet, descending at 18 feet per second, speed 420 miles per hour. Projectile ballistic coefficient 0.3 to 2, muzzle velocity 2,600 feet per second, time of flight at current range 8.3 seconds. Predicted impact point, bearing 016 relative, range 26,900 yards, altitude 6,400 feet. Gun mount 5 trained to bearing 016, elevated to 41 degrees. The computer updated the firing solution every half second as the Kamikaze descended. At 14,200 yards, the solution stabilized. Mount 5 fired. The 5-inch 54 caliber projectile left the barrel at 2,600 feet per second, climbing along a ballistic arc that peaked at 9,000 feet altitude before descending toward the predicted intercept point. The shell carried a VT proximity fuse, variable time fuse, a miniature radar that detonated the projectile when it detected a target within 70 feet. This was another technological advantage Japanese planners hadn't fully appreciated. Previous anti-aircraft shells required direct hits or precisely timed fuses to detonate at specific altitudes. VT fuses eliminated timing errors. The shell only needed to pass near the target. 8.1 seconds after firing, the projectile detonated 42 feet from the Zero fighter's fuselage. The explosion sent steel fragments through the aircraft's engine, cockpit, and control surfaces. The Kamikaze rolled left, trailing smoke, its dive profile broken. The pilot attempted to recover control, but the Zero's hydraulics were shredded. The aircraft entered a flat spin and impacted the ocean at 12,700 yards from Laffey, still nearly 7 miles away. Hagen had no time to celebrate. His radar showed 11 more contacts inside 20 miles, and they were accelerating. The Mark 37 automatically prioritized targets based on range and bearing rate, highlighting the 3 most immediate threats on Hagen's scope. He designated the second target to Mount 5, which was already training toward the new bearing. 32 seconds had elapsed since the first Kamikaze was destroyed. The system was ready to engage again. Japanese kamikaze pilots approaching Laffey that morning had been briefed that American destroyers couldn't effectively engage beyond 6,000 yards. Their tactics reflected this assumption. The aircraft maintained formation until reaching 10 miles from target, then spread out for individual attacks. At 10 miles, they felt safe. At 8 miles, they began their final dives. At 6 miles, they expected to encounter defensive fire. The second Kamikaze never reached 6 miles. Mount 5 fired at 13,800 yards. 7.9 seconds later, the VT fuse detonated. This Zero took fragments through its fuel tank and exploded in mid-air at 11,200 yards from Laffey. The pilot didn't have time to process what had happened. One moment he was outside what he'd been told was the danger zone. The next moment his aircraft was disintegrating. The third Kamikaze, approaching from Laffey's starboard quarter, observed the second aircraft explode and immediately broke into evasive maneuvers. This pilot had more experience than most, possibly a veteran of conventional combat missions who'd volunteered for kamikaze duty. He understood that straight-line approaches made him predictable. He began jinxing, alternating between hard left and right turns every 3 seconds. This should have defeated the fire control solution. Previous American fire control systems struggled with maneuvering targets because human operators couldn't predict turn directions. But the Mark 1A computer didn't predict turns. It simply tracked actual position and calculated where the aircraft was going based on the current velocity vector. Every time the Kamikaze turned, The computer updated its solution. The gun mount tracked smoothly, following the director's guidance. Mount 3, Laffey's aft 5-inch gun, engaged the maneuvering target at 11,400 yards. The first shot missed by 80 feet, outside the VT fuse's detection range. The computer adjusted based on the miss, incorporating new data about the target's maneuver pattern. The second shot, fired 4.6 seconds later, detonated 61 feet from the Zero's cockpit. The pilot was killed instantly by fragments. His aircraft, no longer under control, nosed over and dove into the ocean at 9,000 yards. 3 kamikazes were destroyed at ranges exceeding 9,000 yards. This was a performance that violated every assumption in Japanese tactical planning. But Laffey faced 33 more aircraft, and they were all entering attack range simultaneously. Beckton's bridge team counted contacts converging from 7 different bearings. The coordinated assault that Japanese doctrine promised would overwhelm defenses was beginning. The Mark 37 system could track 6 targets simultaneously, but Laffey only had 6 5-inch guns in 3 twin bounce. The mathematics were brutally simple. If 7 aircraft attacked at once, at least one would face no defensive fire from the main battery, and behind those 7 were 26 more. The technology was extraordinary, but it wasn't magic. The ship could only shoot so fast. What followed was the most intense action any American destroyer experienced during the entire war. For 80 minutes, Laffey engaged continuous waves of kamikazes while maneuvering at maximum speed through a gauntlet of diving aircraft. Fire Controlman Hagen's radar track showed 50 separate contacts entering his 20-mile range ring during that period. 50 aircraft, all intent on destroying his ship. The Mark 37 system performed flawlessly. Every target designated received a firing solution within 4 seconds. Every gun mount trained smoothly to computed bearings. VT fuses functioned with 93% reliability. The technology did exactly what designers promised. But technology alone couldn't overcome the simple arithmetic of 3 gun mounts versus 50 aircraft. The first kamikaze penetrated Laffey's defensive fire at 08:42 hours, exactly 74 minutes into the battle. A Val dive bomber, approaching from directly astern where only 1 gun mount could bear, absorbed 6 5-inch shells, but remained flyable long enough to crash into the destroyer's aft deckhouse. The impact killed 9 men instantly and started fires that spread to the ammunition handling room. Damage control parties flooded the magazines to prevent a catastrophic explosion. The second hit came 4 minutes later. A Zero fighter, trailing smoke from previous damage, clipped Laffey's starboard rail and cartwheeled into gun mount 3. The explosion killed the entire gun crew, 11 men, and disabled the mount. Laffey was now down to 2 operational 5-inch guns. The third, fourth, and fifth hits arrived within 90 seconds of each other. 3 separate kamikazes, all damaged by defensive fire but still functional enough to reach the target, struck Laffey's superstructure, forward deck, and port side. Each impact added casualties and fire. By 08:50 hours, Laffey was burning in 7 locations, dead in the water, listing 12 degrees to port, with 32 men dead and 71 wounded. But she was still shooting. Mount 5, the forward gun that had destroyed the first kamikaze at 14,000 yards, remained operational. Fire Controlman Hagen, his director mount damaged but still tracking, continued feeding solutions to the gun crew. The Mark 37's backup systems kicked in when primary radar failed, using optical rangefinders and manual calculations. The technology degraded, but it didn't quit. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. In the final 20 minutes of the battle, Mount 5 engaged 11 more kamikazes. Historical records credited it with 6 confirmed kills and 3 probables. The gun crew, working through smoke and fire, maintained a sustained rate of fire that kept attacking aircraft at distance even as their ship burned around them. The last kamikaze splashed into the ocean at 09:47 hours. shot down at 8,200 yards. When combat air patrol fighters from USS Yorktown arrived at 0950 to provide cover, they found Laffey still afloat but barely. The destroyer had taken 6 kamikaze hits and 4 bomb strikes. Fires burned in 16 compartments. The ship's list had increased to 17 degrees. Casualty count stood at 32 dead, 71 wounded from a crew of 336, but Laffey survived. Damage control parties saved her through heroic firefighting and flooding to correct the list. More significantly, Laffey's crew had shot down 23 confirmed aircraft during the engagement, with 11 probables. 34 kamikazes were destroyed or damaged from the 50 that attacked. The survival rate through defensive fire was 68%, double what Japanese planners predicted, and the critical detail that would reshape Japanese tactical calculations. 16 of those shoot-downs occurred at ranges exceeding 8,000 yards before the kamikazes entered what they believed was the danger zone. Admiral Matome Ugaki received the first reports of Laffey's action on April 17th through interrogation of captured pilots who'd survived being shot down. His reaction, recorded in his diary, revealed the shock. American defensive fire appears more effective than previous intelligence suggested. Multiple aircraft report being engaged at ranges exceeding 10,000 meters. Losses during the approach phase now exceed losses during the final attack phase. This contradicts all tactical assumptions. Ugaki ordered immediate analysis of all kamikaze operations from April 1st through April 20th. The statistics confirmed what Laffey's battle demonstrated. American destroyers equipped with the new director systems were achieving kill rates of 42% against kamikazes at ranges beyond 8,000 yards. Previous kill rates at those ranges had been below 10%. The implications were devastating for Japanese planning. The entire kamikaze strategy depended on overwhelming American defenses through numbers. If American ships could engage effectively at 12,000 yards instead of 6,000 yards, they had twice as much time to fire. Time translated directly to shells fired, which translated to kills. The mathematics that had favored Japan in 1944 had reversed. Japanese intelligence officers analyzing the new American capabilities identified the Mark 37 director specifically by name in reports dated late April. They understood now that radar fire control wasn't just improved optical ranging, it was computational prediction that made long-range anti-aircraft fire statistically effective. One intelligence estimate calculated that American destroyers with this system had tripled their defensive effectiveness per gun mount, but understanding the problem didn't provide solutions. Japan lacked the manufacturing capacity, electronic components, and computational technology to develop equivalent systems. Japanese radar technology remained years behind American capabilities. Fire control computers of the sophistication required for the Mark 1A didn't exist in Japanese industry. There was no counter-technology response available. Instead, Ugaki modified kamikaze tactics to account for extended engagement ranges. New doctrines emphasized approaching at extremely low altitude, below 50 feet, where radar tracking was degraded by sea surface reflections. Aircraft were ordered to remain dispersed until inside 5,000 yards, then converge simultaneously from multiple directions. The goal was to compress the engagement window, forcing American gunners to make snap decisions without time for calculated fire control solutions. These modifications helped somewhat. Kamikaze survival rates improved slightly in May as pilots implemented low-altitude tactics. But the fundamental problem remained. American ships could see farther and shoot more accurately than Japanese planning had anticipated. Every kamikaze mission now faced 50% higher losses during approach, and those losses occurred before the aircraft could even threaten their targets. The human cost mounted on both sides. Between April 1st and June 22nd, Japanese forces launched 1,946 kamikaze sorties against American ships at Okinawa. 1,465 aircraft were shot down before reaching their targets, a loss rate of 75%. 481 kamikazes achieved hits or near misses, sinking 36 American ships and damaging 368 others. From Japan's perspective, these numbers represented horrific attrition without decisive results. 1,900 pilots dead, nearly 2,000 aircraft destroyed, and the American invasion of Okinawa succeeded anyway. From America's perspective, the casualties were equally sobering. 4,900 sailors killed, 4,800 wounded, 81% of all American casualties at Okinawa occurred at sea from kamikaze attacks. But the trajectory was clear. American defensive technology was improving faster than Japanese tactics could adapt. The Mark 37 system demonstrated this conclusively. Ships equipped with radar fire control survived at substantially higher rates than ships with optical systems. The USS Laffey, despite taking 6 direct hits, survived and returned to service. Dozens of other destroyers equipped with older fire control systems were simply sunk. The fire control technology that saved Laffey represented a broader transformation in naval warfare. For centuries, naval gunnery had been fundamentally limited by human perception and calculation speed. Gunners could only engage targets they could see clearly and track manually. Engagement ranges were constrained by optical limits and human reaction time. Radar and computing broke those constraints. The Mark 37 system could track targets beyond visual range and calculate firing solutions faster than any human. It transformed gunnery from an art requiring experienced gunners making intuitive judgments into a science of mathematics and physics. The best optical gunner in the world couldn't compete with radar tracking and computer prediction. Technology had surpassed human capability in a domain where human skill had previously been decisive. This transformation created psychological challenges for veteran gunners who'd spent careers perfecting manual fire control techniques. Chief Fire Controlman Walter Krantz, serving aboard USS Benyon during Okinawa, wrote in his personal correspondence, "20 years I've been tracking targets through optics, learning to lead aircraft and estimate range by experience. Now there's a machine that does it better than me. It's humbling and remarkable at the same time." The transition from human judgment to computer calculation represented more than just improved accuracy. It represented a fundamental shift in how naval warfare functioned. Battles would increasingly be won by technological sophistication rather than crew experience. The destroyer with better electronics would defeat the destroyer with better gunners. This principle would define naval combat for the next 8 decades. Japanese naval officers recognized this shift, even as they lacked the technology to match it. Commander Yoshio Shiga, captured after his destroyer was sunk in June 1945, told interrogators, "Your ships have electronic eyes, we cannot blind, and electronic brains we cannot confuse. This is not a fight between samurai anymore, it is a fight between technologies, and we have already lost that fight." The Mark 37 system's influence extended far beyond World War II. The principle of radar-guided fire control became standard on every naval vessel designed after 1945. Modern systems like the Aegis combat system aboard American destroyers and cruisers are direct descendants of the Mark 37, using the same fundamental approach: radar detection, computer calculation, automated gun or missile guidance. The AN/SPY-1 radar aboard Aegis ships can track hundreds of targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 200 miles. The system's computers calculate firing solutions in microseconds and coordinate responses from multiple weapon systems. But the underlying concept remains identical to what Fire Controlman Hagen used in 1945. Use radar to see farther than the enemy expects. Use computers, calculate faster than humans can. Engage threats before they enter what they believe is attack range. Modern close-in weapon systems like the Phalanx CIWS demonstrate the evolution of the principle. These radar-guided Gatling guns engage incoming missiles at ranges up to 3 miles, firing 75 rounds per second with computer-calculated accuracy. The system operates entirely autonomously, detecting threats, calculating solutions, and firing without human intervention. It's the Mark 37 concept, refined through 8 decades of technological development. Air defense systems worldwide adopted similar approaches. The American Patriot missile system uses radar tracking and computer prediction to engage aircraft and missiles at ranges exceeding 100 miles. Russian S-400 systems employ comparable technology. Israeli Iron Dome uses radar and computing to intercept rockets and artillery shells in flight. Every modern air defense system follows the template established by radar fire control in World War II. The psychological transformation proved equally influential. Military training shifted from emphasizing individual skill to emphasizing system operation. Modern fire controlmen don't manually calculate firing solutions. They monitor automated systems and intervene when the technology malfunctions. The role changed from craftsman to technician, from artist to engineer. This shift generated resistance initially. Veteran gunners in the 1950s and 60s argued that over-reliance on technology created vulnerability. What happened when radar failed or computers malfunctioned? The answer, proven repeatedly in combat, was that technology failed less often than human judgment under stress. Automated systems maintained performance regardless of fatigue, fear, or chaos. Humans degraded under those same conditions. By the Vietnam War, the debate had ended. Technology's superiority was undeniable. American ships using radar fire control achieved hit rates against aircraft exceeding 60%. Ships using manual optical systems rarely exceeded 20%. The mathematics settled the argument. Every navy worldwide invested in radar and computers. Manual fire control became historical curiosity, taught in naval academies as context but not practiced in fleet operations. The Mark 37's legacy appears in unexpected places. Commercial aviation autopilot systems use similar principles: radar detection, computer calculation, automated control. Self-driving cars employ the same approach: sensor detection, predictive computing, autonomous operation. The fundamental innovation wasn't specific technology. It was the concept that machines could perceive and calculate faster than humans, making them superior for tasks requiring rapid decision-making. The USS Laffey herself became a monument to this transformation. After extensive repairs at Seattle, she returned to service in August 1945, too late to see further combat. The war ended while she was still in refit, but her April 16th battle became legendary within the destroyer force. Sailors called her the ship that would not die. Naval historians studied the engagement as the definitive example of technology, enabling survival against overwhelming odds. Laffey was decommissioned in 1947, then recommissioned during the Korean War for shore bombardment duty. She served until 1975, accumulating more combat time than almost any other American destroyer. In 1981, she was permanently moored at Patriots Point Naval Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, where she remains today. Visitors can walk her decks, see the Mark 37 director that fire controlman Hagen operated, and stand where 50 kamikazes tried to sink her. The Japanese perspective on radar fire control evolved significantly after the war. Admiral Ugaki, who had commanded kamikaze operations, died in the final Kamikaze attack of the war on August 15, 1945. He deliberately flew his aircraft into the ocean off Okinawa, hours after Japan's surrender was announced, following samurai tradition. His final diary entry acknowledged that technology, not courage or tactics, had determined the war's outcome. Post-war Japanese naval officers studying the Okinawa campaign reached similar conclusions. Captain Rikihei Inaguchi, who'd helped plan kamikaze operations, wrote in his 1958 memoir, "We sent brave men to die in obsolete aircraft against ships equipped with technology we could not match. This was not warfare. It was systematic slaughter enabled by technological disparity we refused to acknowledge until too late." The technological gap between American and Japanese capabilities in 1945 extended beyond just fire and control systems. American ships had proximity fuses, Japanese shells used timed fuses. American destroyers carried search radar with 50-mile range. Japanese destroyers rarely had radar at all. American fire control computers made 23 simultaneous calculations. Japanese gunners used mechanical calculators requiring manual input. These disparities accumulated into overwhelming advantage. An American destroyer could detect, track, and engage targets that Japanese ships couldn't even see yet. The battles weren't fair fights. They were demonstrations of industrial and technological supremacy. Japan's military leaders understood this by 1945, but understanding couldn't overcome the fundamental economic and scientific advantages America possessed. The human element remained critical even as technology dominated. Fire Controlman Hagen's skill operating the Mark 37 was essential to Laffey's survival. The system required trained operators who understood its capabilities and limitations. Radar could track targets, but humans had to interpret radar returns and distinguish real threats from false contacts. Computers calculated firing solutions, but humans had to verify those solutions made tactical sense before firing. The best technology paired with incompetent operators failed. Conversely, skilled operators with inferior technology often achieved remarkable results. The optimal combination was sophisticated technology operated by highly trained personnel. This principle remains fundamental in military doctrine today. Advanced weapon systems require extensive training pipelines. An Aegis destroyer's crew spends months learning to operate their systems before deployment. The cost of this technological sophistication was substantial. A Fletcher-class destroyer in 1943 cost approximately $6 million to build. Adding the Mark 37 system and associated fire control equipment increased costs by 18%. The Navy judged this worthwhile based on survival rates. Ships with radar fire control survived at 42% higher rates than ships without it. Saving ships and crews justified the expense. Modern equivalents show the same pattern. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer costs approximately $2 billion. The Aegis combat system represents roughly 20% of that cost. But the system enables the destroyer to defend itself and other ships against threats that would otherwise be unstoppable. The economic calculation remains valid. Sophisticated defense systems cost more but save ships and lives. The Mark 37's development history revealed how wartime urgency accelerated innovation. The system's prototype was tested in 1942. By 1943, early production models equipped select cruisers. By 1944, destroyer installations began. By 1945, the system was standard equipment on new construction destroyers. 3 years from prototype to fleet-wide deployment represented remarkable speed for such complex technology. This acceleration was possible only because of massive industrial investment and engineering resources. Western Electric manufactured the directors. Ford Instrument Company built the computers. Hundreds of subcontractors provided components. At peak production, American factories produced 32 complete Mark 37 systems per month. This industrial capacity was itself a weapon, allowing technology to be deployed faster than enemies could develop counters. Japanese industry couldn't match this production pace. Japanese factories struggled to produce basic radar systems, let alone sophisticated fire control computers. Material shortages, lack of precision manufacturing capability, and American submarine warfare that disrupted supply chains all constrained Japanese technological development. By 1945, the industrial gap was insurmountable. The strategic implications extended beyond individual battles. American naval dominance enabled the island-hopping campaign that brought bombers within range of Japan's home islands. That campaign depended on ships surviving kamikaze attacks long enough to support amphibious landings. Radar fire control made that survival possible. Without it, casualty rates might have been severe enough to slow or halt offensive operations. Alternative histories speculate what might have happened if Japan had developed equivalent fire control technology. Would kamikaze tactics have been more effective? Would Okinawa have been more costly for American forces? These questions are unanswerable, but they highlight how single technological advantages can shape entire campaigns. The Mark 37 wasn't the only factor determining victory, but it was significant enough that its absence might have changed outcomes. The ethical dimension of technological warfare deserves consideration. Japanese kamikaze pilots were young men, average age 22, sent to die in aircraft their leaders knew were technologically obsolete. Many had minimal flight training and essentially no chance of survival. American technological superiority made their deaths even more certain. This raises uncomfortable questions about warfare's evolution. When one side possesses overwhelming technological advantage, does combat become execution rather than battle? The kamikaze pilots at Okinawa faced American ships they couldn't effectively attack from ranges they didn't know were lethal. They died before understanding they were already in kill zones. This asymmetry, while militarily advantageous for America, represented a form of warfare where courage and skill mattered far less than electronics and computing. Modern warfare has amplified this dynamic. American forces in recent conflicts have engaged enemies from ranges where return fire was impossible. Precision-guided munitions strike targets who never see the aircraft that launched them. Drones eliminate targets from operators sitting in air-conditioned control stations thousands of miles away. The technological gap has widened to the point where combat sometimes resembles one-sided targeting exercises. These developments trace directly back to the principle the Mark 37 demonstrated. Technology can create such overwhelming advantage that traditional martial virtues become irrelevant. Bravery, training, and tactical skill mean little when your enemy can kill you from beyond your sensory range using automated systems you cannot counter. The Japanese kamikaze pilots exemplified this tragic reality. They displayed extraordinary courage, willingly sacrificing their lives for their nation. But courage couldn't overcome radar and computing. Their deaths achieved diminishing returns as American technology improved. By June 1945, kamikaze attacks were inflicting minimal damage relative to losses. The tactic had become mathematically unsustainable, yet it continued because Japan had no alternatives. Fire Controlman First Class Robert Hagan survived the war and the battle aboard Laffey. He received the Bronze Star for his actions on April 16, specifically cited for maintaining fire control operations despite ship damage and casualties around him. After the war, he worked for Western Electric, the company that manufactured the Mark 37 system, helping design next-generation naval radar systems. In a 1983 interview conducted at the Naval Museum where Laffey is preserved, Hagan reflected on his wartime experience. "I was 23 years old, operating equipment that could track targets I couldn't see and calculate solutions I couldn't do in my head. The system worked because it took human limitations out of the equation. That's what won the battle. Not my skill, not courage, just technology doing what technology does best, calculating faster than humans and seeing farther than eyes can." This assessment was both humble and accurate. Hagan's skill mattered, his training was essential, but the technology multiplied his effectiveness beyond what any human could achieve through experience alone. The combination of trained operator and sophisticated system created capability neither could achieve independently. Lieutenant Commander Julian Beckton, Laffey's captain during the battle, received the Navy Cross. His post-war career included command of larger vessels and eventually promotion to Rear Admiral. He consistently advocated for technological investment in naval capabilities, arguing that the ships with best electronics would win future battles regardless of crew experience or tactical doctrine. Beckton's prediction proved accurate. The guided missile cruisers and destroyers developed in the 1950s and 60s emphasized electronics and fire control over traditional gunnery. Ships became platforms for sophisticated sensors and weapons systems. The Mark 37 was replaced by the Mark 56, then the Mark 74, then Aegis. Each generation increased capability through better radar, faster and computers, and more automated operation. The destroyer itself evolved from a torpedo boat hunter with guns as primary weapons into an air defense platform where missiles and electronics were primary systems. This transformation began with radar fire control in World War II. The principle that detection and calculation determined success more than physical weapons became fundamental to ship design. Modern American destroyers carry fewer gun mounts than World War II destroyers, but have vastly greater combat capability. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer has one 5-inch gun mount compared to 3 or more on Fletcher-class destroyers. But that single gun, guided by sophisticated fire control, has effective range and accuracy that exceeds anything available in 1945. The missiles the modern destroyer carries extend engagement ranges to hundreds of miles. The USS Laffey's battle demonstrated principles that remain valid 80 years later. Technology that extends engagement range provides decisive advantage. Automated systems outperform human judgment for rapid calculation tasks. Investment in sophisticated defense systems saves lives and ships. These lessons shaped naval development throughout the Cold War and into the 21st century. The Mark 37 systems operators, young men like Robert Hagan, were pioneers in a transformation they didn't fully recognize at the time. They were among the first humans to fight battles where machines handled perception and calculation, while humans monitored and supervised. This division of labor became standard in modern warfare. Humans make strategic decisions and monitor systems. Machines execute tactical details. This shift required changes in military culture. Traditional naval culture emphasized seamanship, gunnery skills, and tactical intuition developed through experience. Radar fire control culture emphasized technical knowledge, system operation, and trust in automated calculations. Veteran sailors sometimes struggled with this transition, feeling their hard-won expertise was being devalued. But the data was undeniable. Ships with radar fire control survived at higher rates. Crews trained on automated systems achieved better results. The technology worked. Resistance to change faded as success validated the new approach. By the 1950s, every navy worldwide was pursuing similar capabilities. The transformation the Mark 37 initiated became universal. The kamikaze threat itself disappeared after World War II, but the principle of massed air attack remained relevant throughout the Cold War. Soviet doctrine emphasized overwhelming American naval forces with coordinated missile strikes from aircraft, ships, and submarines. American naval air defense evolved specifically to counter this threat, using technologies pioneered during World War II. The Aegis combat system, developed in the 1970s and 80s, was designed to track and engage hundreds of simultaneous threats, exactly the scenario Laffey faced at Okinawa. The system could coordinate responses from multiple ships, sharing radar data and distributing targets automatically. This network-centric warfare approach traced directly back to lessons learned fighting kamikazes in 1945. The specific technological lineage is clear. Mark 37 radar fire control led to Mark 56 automated systems, which led to Terrier missile systems, which led to Aegis. Each generation built on previous developments, incorporating faster computers, better radar, and more sophisticated algorithms. But the fundamental concept remained constant. Use technology to see farther, calculate faster, and engage threats before they reach attack range. This evolutionary path demonstrates how wartime innovation shapes peacetime development. The Mark 37 was rushed into service to counter an immediate threat. Its success validated approaches that influenced naval design for decades. Military technology often develops this way, crisis-driven innovation that proves successful enough to become foundational for future systems. The human cost of the Okinawa campaign remained tragically high despite technological advantages. American casualties exceeded 12,000 killed and 38,000 wounded. Japanese casualties approached 100,000 military dead, plus countless civilian deaths. The kamikaze attacks inflicted the majority of American naval casualties, despite radar fire control reducing their effectiveness. Technology mitigated losses but couldn't prevent them entirely. Even the best systems failed sometimes. Radar malfunctioned, computers generated incorrect solutions, proximity fuses didn't detonate, human error remained a factor. Operators made mistakes under stress. Communication failures caused coordination problems. The fog of war persisted despite sophisticated electronics. What technology did was shift odds. Without radar fire control, American ships might have faced 70 or 80% kamikaze penetration rates instead of 25%. Casualties might have doubled or tripled. The invasion might have been delayed or even cancelled if naval losses became unsustainable. The Mark 37 didn't make victory certain, but it made victory possible at acceptable cost. This calculation defines military technology's purpose, not to eliminate risk, but to reduce it to manageable levels. Perfect defense doesn't exist. The goal is defense effective enough that operations can continue despite enemy action. Radar fire control achieved this goal at Okinawa. Ships took damage, but the fleet maintained combat capability throughout the campaign. The psychological impact on surviving kamikaze pilots was profound. Those who flew missions and returned due to mechanical failures or other reasons reported increasing dread of American defensive fire. They'd been told to expect heavy resistance only in the final 1,000 yards. Instead, they faced accurate fire from ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. The psychological advantage of the surprise approach was lost. Post-war interviews with former kamikaze pilots revealed that many questioned their mission's effectiveness by May 1945. They understood the loss rates had become unsustainable. But military discipline and cultural pressure made dissent impossible. They continued flying missions they knew were essentially suicide with minimal military value. The human tragedy extended beyond death to the knowledge that death was accomplishing nothing. American sailors felt little sympathy at the time. They were fighting for survival against enemies trying to kill them. The technological advantage was welcome, even necessary. Philosophical questions about fairness or warfare's ethics seemed irrelevant when kamikazes dove at your ship. Post-war reflection brought more nuanced perspectives. But during combat, better technology that kept you alive was simply good fortune. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan's home islands in 1945 demonstrated the same principle on a larger scale. American B-29 bombers struck from altitudes Japanese fighters struggled to reach, using radar-guided navigation and targeting. The technological gap enabled air campaigns that devastated Japanese cities with relatively low bomber losses. Again, technology created asymmetric warfare, where one side inflicted damage the other couldn't effectively prevent. American submarines using radar and advanced torpedoes devastated Japanese shipping. American aircraft carriers using radar detection and fighter direction engaged Japanese formations before being spotted themselves. At every level, American technological advantages accumulated into operational dominance. The Mark 37 was one component of a broader technological superiority. Thank you for watching. For more detailed, historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.